today. A little bit of kind of slightly sinister. I don't know what it is. I'm all right. I mean, no problems there. But it's like there's something not right today. Anyway, to shift gears, I want to talk about first of all. I want to direct when you finish listening to this video, I will post a link to an article written by a friend of mine, an author called Jason Heppenstall in the UK, in England, down in Cornwall, and it's about basically energy. And I've been wanting to make this video for a while, but because of the Rona and lockdown and everything. But he kind of gives the foundation for what I'm going to talk about now. And this is the procurement of energy in relationship to civilization, in relationship to the future and the present state of humanity. Now, in a kind of esoteric sense, there's always the thing as above, so below. You know, the war in heaven is reflected in as the war on earth and all this kind of thing. And there's a lot of truth to this in terms of humanity's relationship with energy, and in particular, our relationship with hydrocarbons. Now, I don't, if you were to point out that there was one thing, one piece of technology that really has impacted on humans more than anything else, and that is the Promethean concept of the creation of fire, or the harnessing of fire. Fire existed in nature from lightning strikes and things like that, but the harnessing of fire, the ability to make fire and to generate hydrocarbons from burning wood and coal and whatever they could find to burn, it changed everything, and in ways like that really was what evolved us away from the animals. There's so much they talk about the creation of the wheel, but much more important than that was the stewardship of hydrocarbons. That's the way I'd probably want to put this. It's been with us since the Paleolithic, at least. It's an incredibly ancient thing, and it built us as a people and a civilization all over the world. You just think of like when humans had the ability to create fire, this meant they could go to live in caves and be safe from outside predators at night. This living in caves also sheltered them from the elements such as the cold weather and whatever that improved their health no end. And also it gave them a sense of power over the natural world. It was the first form of magic. I write about this in a couple of my books, and how the rubbing of the two sticks together was the cross with the real light of the world in the middle, because in the darkness that would have been the light of the world. And this harnessing of fire changed humans, where they didn't only they would like sleep from dusk to dawn. So basically human existence only took place during the daylight hours, and then they would sleep until the following dawn, because there was just nothing to do. And when they harnessed fire, suddenly the nighttime was accessible, the darkness was accessible, and the hours of darkness were no longer a time of sleep. And that's when they went from the sleeping dream to the waking dream. And this is where the whole concept of sitting around the fire, the heart fire, I wrote about this a lot in the book, The Druid Code, the generation of mythologies and stories, and the first spiritual traditions, the dancing simulacrum of flame among the burning embers, became phantoms, gods, ghosts, demons, all kinds of things. Stories, legends. The fire took on a supernatural quality all by itself. The fire allowed the first art to take place, because the earliest humans would pick the soot up off the ground of where the fire was and draw on the wall of the cave, creating the first cave art. And in a very short time became incredibly competent at this work, at this ability. So, that's why the caves in Lecaux in southern France, the artwork, even by today's standards, is remarkable. They could cook meat and vegetables, making them more easy to digest. So their diets improved. As their diets improved, their health improved. And they would not have to go sleep long periods to digest raw meat. If the meat was cooked, they could not only digest it much more quickly and have more, vitality after they've eaten, but also these gave them, this cooking of the meat also would have killed bacteria and made things like meat that was going off safer to eat. So there was a kind of a healing quality of it. And but fire was also dangerous. So man, I often wonder if the stone circles were the original were the descendant of the stones they put around the fires in the Paleolithic period, the Mesolithic period, and so on. But there's no doubting the incredible and phenomenal impact the harnessing of the hydrocarbon had upon the course of human endeavor. From that to the burning of forests in order to plant, the deep dark forests of the world. When agriculture came along, they were burned down, and then crops were planted upon them so they could have food from agriculture. But also they learned that by burning the land, it would actually fertilize it. So the science was developing and this kind of thing, and that led on to all through history and what fire was used for, everything from weapons to cooking to heating to eventually the Industrial Revolution and the use of fire to, the burning of coal in particular as a fuel. Allowed then things like smelters and steel industry and iron and all this kind of thing to come out of that, all the way up to the creation of weapons and gunpowder and rockets to get us to the moon. It was all hydrocarbons, and to this day. And our growth as a culture is all been based upon of the abundance of hydrocarbons. But things are changing. Things are changing. This abundance of hydrocarbons is not limitless. It would be if we had a specific population size on the planet. And we could continue in the present technological era, and I think we'll be forced to it at some point, to burn coal and other fuels like turf here in Ireland in order to generate electricity, because the the fuel is running out. The oil, peak oil really is a real thing, because the oil that's left, a lot of it is garbage. A lot of it has to be, a lot of work has to be put into it. This is why when Trump was in, just before Trump left, oil had really no value in the world. And since the pipeline, the Keystone pipeline, has been cut off by the Biden administration in America, the price of petroleum has gone through the roof, because now, we're forced to face the fact that oil is a depleting resource in the West anyway. I don't know what to say about Russia and stuff like that, but in the West, as is gas. Now, there is hope in countries like the USA that have coal, and this is why the Trump administration invested so heavily into the resurgence of the coal industry in the US. Coal is another phenomenal way you can produce electricity by boiling water and moving turbines. And power stations today are such that you can literally burn the most, I'm not talking about anthracite, I'm talking about the worst kind of coals, or the dirtiest oils and even plastics, and make electricity. That's why I do like biomass. And the filtration systems are such in modern burners. This is mainly developed out of things like incinerators, that literally all that comes out of the top of the chimney at the end is water. So we've got really, really, really good at generating, at burning things like oil and coal and gas and even biomass, and things like even recycling incinerators, to the point now the emissions are nothing. You could live next door to one and be perfectly safe. Now, that should have been a good thing, but that was never really invested. The whole thing then, after King Fahd cut off the oil in Saudi Arabia back in '74 and started what was called the Arab oil crisis. The addiction or intoxication with oil in the West got a fright. It didn't, the Americans experiencing gas lines to get petrol for their cars and all over the world. And it caused a shock, an economic shock that hasn't ever been recovered from. Like a lot of the economic problems we still have to this day go directly back to when King Fahd shut off the oil wells in 1974 and caused the OPEC oil crisis. Yes, those things came online since then, such as Norway and Scotland and the North Sea oil, and then Alaska, and then but there's also and then Venezuela, but that's turned out to be a catastrophe because of communism. And I often wonder how much of the ability to sell Russia's oil to the West was what caused the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the fall of communism. But I don't know about that now because the Russians aren't really selling much. They're selling gas into Europe, but not oil. And so then this is when a kind of like a soft Atlantis happened. Like the story of Atlantis was they developed magical powers technology so powerful that it caused them to destroy their society. And this is echoed not only in the Atlantean mythology. That's a very common motif of all around the world, of the world before the world. And that the world that exists, the very, very ancient civilizations like Atlantis and Lemuria, that there was always a thing that mankind got too powerful and too advanced, and then you had a fall, and then you had to start up over again. And that's why we have these incredibly ancient and complex things we find all over the world. They're the remainders of the world before the world. Okay, so that's kind of almost a metaphor too for the Garden of Eden and mankind being cast out of the Garden of Eden as well. So this thing that happened in '74 and has led to this kind of like secular inflationary recessions and so on. Though up until '74, the West was very stable. Very stable economically and everything. There's been tremendous growth since World War II, and even things like in America, like the Korean War and the Vietnam War, had not affected it. At the same time, Europe had great economic growth, and not just Germany, even like countries like Ireland, since the '50s on, the late '50s on, particularly. And a lot of it was powered by industry and manufacturing and everything else, and massive cultural things directly because of the hydrocarbons, but directly because of things like oil. The music thing, all the LPs and singles, that was all, oil. That's why the albums before the OPEC oil crisis are thicker than the ones afterwards. There's always that joke I've been making for years, like the ELP, the Emerson, Lake and Palmer pre-OPEC albums. They it was really did more thickness to put more bullshit into the grooves, but the mirroring of above as so below. That's when the kind of new age hippie things took off. The beginning of that is the doomsday clock. Oh, 5 minutes to midnight, the hole in the ozone layer, the oncoming ice age, and now the oncoming global warming. This is all a result of the '74 oil crisis thing. And you had the first people move off the grid to kind of like the first kind of people, either they were religious nut survivalists or hippies or anyone else who said, you know what, I'm going to get myself a few acres in the countryside. I can't deal with being at the mercy of the man, and I'm going to start live off vegetables and do something else, take a part-time job somewhere. And that's when it all started, as a direct reaction to the '74 OPEC oil crisis. And we've been in that state of crisis, this soft Atlantis, ever since. Now, to me, let's talk about, as you know, I'm always looking for a spiritual concept to these things. Hydrocarbons, if the hydrocarbons were a god, it would be a benevolent, loving God, because the hydrocarbon God has given so much to humanity on every level that he or the hydrocarbon God has been a benevolent God until we took advantage and starting eating too much fruit out of the orchard and not leaving any seed for next year's growth. And so, therefore, what the 74 oil thing was, that mankind had, the hydrocarbon god had like, no, you're not going to bleed me dry ever again anymore. Now, the reason for this was that was connected strongly with this belief in unlimited economic growth. And ironically, that instead of that tampering or tempering after the OPEC oil crisis, this is when you had things like Reaganomics that came afterwards. And this belief in total and utter growth, which I have to say was successful, was based on the notion that money, cheap money, eventually floats all boats. And it did, I have to say it did. And you had like Margaret Thatcher and the sort of like selfish society thing. It did work. It did work. But ironically, what was the bridge? What was the ones against that? The coal miners, hydrocarbon. The hydrocarbon god was the hydrocarbon god was saying to the god of economics, the gods of money, I am not capable of unlimited economic growth, or growth of hydrocarbon use connected to your, coupled to your unlimited notions of, endless economic growth. You see, this is the kind of thing where everything is kind of connected. Now, the obvious answer to the hydrocarbon god and their wrath, as we took advantage of him, would be to have been sacrificed for him. And the way we could have done that was, and kept this going forever, would be to drastically reduce the Earth's population. Drastically reducing the Earth's population would mean far less hydrocarbons. I mean, this is why Chinese, they burn all their food in woks, because they ran out of firewood about 1,000 years ago, and they had to develop a pan that could cook with as little fuel as possible. And that's where the Chinese wok came from, because they cut down all the trees. There was almost nothing left to burn with. And the hydrocarbons should have became precious. And instead of, what we should have done then was, what happened then was, there was two schools of thought. There was like, when you talk about like when Christianity first happened, there were several schools of Christianity or whatever. Well, there was two schools of the post-hydrocarbon abuse. One was insulation, and in building better insulated buildings, fuel efficiency in cars, that kind of thing. And the other one was the emergence of what we now call green energy, the belief that science would somehow solve this problem by creating fusion reactors or other things, which has failed miserably at. You still hear about that to this day. That's been a miserable failure. This whole thing of clean, unlimited energy has been running around for about 50 years and been a catastrophic failure. And that's how you see the religious aspects of that has been incorporated into things like the New Age group with their 0 point energy. They don't even know it's zero, and the free energy. This obsession with free energy. Free energy does not exist in this universe. It's always, you cannot. I think Jason says it in his article, in his blog post. Within this material matrix we live in, you cannot escape the laws of thermodynamics. It's that simple. And so there was this kind of like psychiatric breakdown that somehow some kind of free energy existed, like some kind of Tesla free energy. It didn't. It never did. I can't. And people who didn't know anything about science or electronics or physics making these statements. And the other side of it was. And I'm still going to get people below saying to me, Tesla had free energy. No, he was still generating it from a generator. You understand? That had to be built. That Wardenclyffe generator was an enormous structure. And that would have only powered the electricity in a certain region. There would have been loads of those things. So this thing of free energy, and that'd be maintained and everything. The laws of thermodynamics cannot be escaped in this material construct. Now, so the school of insulation should have been, for what I believe, the way to do it. I mean, I just don't understand why, we have the technology, and have had it for about 30 years, where you can build a wooden house with insulation that's so good that literally only the heat off your body in the depths of winter is enough to keep it warm. I mean, why isn't every building like that? Especially in these northern climates here. But no, they still build them with cavity walls and rudimentary insulation. Granted, we're a lot better than they used to be, but they're still nowhere near where they should be. And a lot of it has to do with the population explosion. You know, not only is there a population explosion, but we're importing people from the third world. And those people from the third world, they come here, and what's left in their country is a space. What do they fill their space in their country they came from? More people. And this is all part of the unlimited economic growth that the more and more increase, it never ends. The world's population, I absolutely 100% believe that we do need population reduction. And this is why I don't, these truthers need to get their heads together. Oh, the elites want population reduction, you know, because they're all satanic influence. No, it's not that. Think about it logically. We only have so much resources on this fucking planet. We cannot have indefinite population growth. You don't have to, they extrapolated things like they're killing everybody. No, we can do it through things like birth control and stuff. And I don't see a problem with that once it's done, humanely. And, people aren't forced to do it. Like maybe if people have more than two kids, heavily tax them. Something like that. There's ways around it without being an animal, like without cutting his balls off or something like that. And so what's happened is we've transferred this energy thing. So what happened was we created this kind of out of sight, out of mind thing, right? That suddenly, well, if we move all the industry to China and India and Mexico, and we walk around our towns and cities and don't see thousands of smokestacks and thousands of trucks going into factories and thousands of rail yards delivering massive amounts of coal and material to factories that are belching out this filth that somehow it no longer exists anymore. No, it still exists. It's in China and Russia, India, Eastern Europe. That's where it still exists. It's just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist anymore. So what happened then was in this parentheses, in this gap, in created by this delusion that we somehow don't need big factories anymore. We did, and we're still using them. They're just in China and India now. That somehow we now can create a green economy. Now, this is when things got really dark. If I was to say to you, like when I said earlier on, that if the hydrocarbon god was a god, it was a benevolent, loving god that we took advantage of. Well, green energy, if it was a god, it would be a demon. Green energy is the evil demon of it all. While we instead of us sacrificing building high levels with houses with high levels of insulation, driving small cars. What were we all driving after the oil loss? People were driving gigantic SUVs, four-wheel drive diesel guzzling fuckers, and living in the middle of cities that were full of they didn't have a drop of snow in them. Hummers and stuff like that. No, we should have went. I should have mandatory small cars like what nearly took off in the 70s, and it should have stayed. And it should have got more cars, more fuel efficient, running on, and buses and more public transport. We should have insulated the houses and buildings and apartment buildings very, very well. That they need almost no heating to heat them, but we didn't sacrifice. What we did was, when I say we, I mean collectively as a society in terms of how we're run, is that they went to worship the golden calf of green energy instead, to use a biblical metaphor. We turned our back on our benevolent, loving hydrocarbon god and began to worship the green demon. The green demon playing on this belief of a post-law of thermodynamics world where energy is somehow free, then gave us effigies and lies that say, oh, I can be just as good as your hydrocarbon god. You don't need a big, huge oil generating power plant pumping out megawatts. You can have these windmills that turn. Now, yes, they generate electricity. Yes, solar generates electricity. Yes, wave generates electricity. But they don't generate the load. This is the problem. This is the I remember like 20 years ago trying to explain to someone on Usenet, and he one of these like middle class PC types, greeny types. I replaced all the halogen lamps in my kitchen overhead cabinets with LED ones, and they just don't produce enough light. They don't have the same throw. And I said, "Welcome to your post-hydrocarbon world." Oh no, but it's better for the environment. Not really. Not really. Now, and this is a reason for this because we have you noticed even the forms of light have moved away from hydrocarbon light. They got rid of the incandescent bulb. The incandescent bulb, the old filament bulb in a vacuum that lit up and worked perfectly well for over a century, was suddenly bad for the environment. And then they replaced it with these awful, LED bulbs and these other ones that have gases inside them and everything, that low energy bulbs, which are much more expensive to manufacture and almost impossible to get rid of. And what do we replace? A burning wire inside a vacuum. Those little incandescent bulbs are like temples to the hydrocarbon god. They gave us heat as well. Remember that? The hydrocarbon god gives us heat and light. And so the green energy thing, suddenly these windmills start popping up all over the place. These turbines, destroying the landscape, killing the birds, and then they say, okay, they didn't really work, and we can put them out to sea. Now, if you're an environmentalist, to me that's about caring about the environment, right? But these people don't care about the environment. They want the tokenism of the green demon giving them wind turbines and killing the birds and destroying the landscape, because what they really want is not that they're not really environmentalists. They are the priests of the green demon. That's really what they are. So then they say, okay, let's. I got a better idea. Let's put them in massive arrays out to sea. Now that only makes them more difficult to service and more difficult to function. Big, longer cables to them and stuff like that. And they also still chopping the birds out of the sky. And we don't know what have you ever been next to one of these things when they're going? They kick up a hell of a fucking racket. Now, what effect is that having on whales and marine mammals and other marine creatures that live underneath and around those arrays, such as like whale and porpoise migrations? We don't know because again, the environmentalist today doesn't care about the environment. They care about the veneration of the green demon that they all worship. Now, the green demon is a deceiver. It tells you, I can replace the hydrocarbon god. Well, it can't, okay? Because it can't. You have energy security is the issue there, right? You could not invent a worse machine for generating electricity than a wind turbine. It is ugly. It destroys the environment. You would put a coal station next to an array of them, and it'd be much better for the environment because I told you they have the control of emissions much better now. People still think in the 1940s and stuff like that. And no, chopping the birds up, destroying the view, making a hell of a racket, and they don't work when the wind doesn't blow. They need a diesel engine that has thousands of gallons of diesel in it to start them. So they're already it's a diesel engine. It's not run by the wind, and they need something like each one needs 15 tons of lubricant, very expensive lubricant, I might add, to every year. Otherwise, they would seize up and go on fire from friction. And that's why the ones that you see going on fire, what happened there was the lubricant didn't work anymore. The blades created friction, and the friction set fire to the diesel inside the housing and all the wiring and everything all went up in flames. That's what happened there. And there's been lots of engineers have been killed by them working on them, by them suddenly going on fire and things like that. And horrible deaths. Like there's one terrible story of two engineers in Holland giving each other a hug and then jumping to their deaths because these things are gigantic. And then the blades can't be the polycarbon blades can't be recycled, so that we now have more problem with landfills used to landfills terrible. Now we have these blades that are they're doing even worse. There's a false god. The green god is a false god, and this is why they become obsessed with this is why people who have souls. I'm going to say this right here and then. I can always tell someone who doesn't have a soul, and you know how I can tell how they don't have a soul? that they admire Greta Thunberg. They look at Greta Thunberg and go, "Isn't she wonderful?" Right? Right there and then, I know you don't have a soul, and I can always tell the depth of a person's soul by their revulsion of Greta Thunberg. Oh, that Swedish doom potato makes me sick. The sight of her, she's so horrible. Everything of the toxic energy off her. I know I'm dealing with someone who has a deep soul that haven't. So the ones that don't have souls and are constantly worshipping the green demon, look at this appalling, dysfunctional teenager who's now 18. Now 18. See, I made a joke on Twitter the other day. Someone put a Greta Thunberg mural up in Dublin that was vandalised, and I wrote on the needle, well, the Greens don't care anymore because the men who vote for the Green Party stopped masturbating to her picture when she turned 18. There was a creepy element of paedophilia among kind of like greenie types with that. There really fucking was. It was creepy, and she's horrible. She's horrible. Oh, she's only a child. She's fucking 18. She has autism. Well, there's autistic kids who are beautiful souls, and there's autistic kids who are dark and nasty. She's dark and fucking nasty. And she surrounds herself with soulless types, like fucking the Monaco royal family on their yachts and stuff like that. She doesn't even know what she's saying half the time. She's possessed. She's literally possessed by the green demon. Now, you know what I'm always talking about in paganism? That I think the way that paganism is doomed is if paganism tries to go back to how things were 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. Like, for instance, you have the growth of this Nordic paganism in mainly among Protestants, but they have blots just like they had 1,000. I'm not saying anything wrong with it, and it's if you're into that, good for you, but it's not going to spread paganism into the main culture. Like my article, I'll put the link below, on chaos paganism. We need quantum gods for a quantum age, this kind of thing. So paganism can only survive if it keeps or come back if it's relevant to the times that we live in. And one of these things is that, like, the height, within the kind of concept is, I see the hydrocarbon god as a god, but as a god we've abused, a god we've hurt because of our greed. The god gave us a bounty of energy, but he didn't give us a cornucopia that could never be emptied, or a stream that could never be run dry. And we took advantage of, and that advantage allowed the green demon to take over instead, the green energy demon. And in terms of paganism, that's how I would apply. That's how I rationalize it in my head, in this metaphorical sense, but it's also literal too in many ways. And Greta Thunberg is a kind of like a grimmer worm thing. You think of I'm back to Tolkien again. You think of the green energy as the Eye of Sauron. Well, Grimmer Wormtongue it would be Greta Thunberg, whispering in the ears of political leaders, and King Thoradin of the Rohan, and brainwashing them with this green bullshit, and this kind of thing. When the answer all along was very simple: stop unlimited economic growth, and frugality in that traditional sense of smaller transport systems that use less energy, and houses that are very well insulated, and living our lives in much more balance with nature. That doesn't mean going into a field and going, "Om." I'm talking about things like, if we're going to ever restructure our society, do it in such a way that we literally go to sleep when it gets dark and wake up when it gets light. And that way, we have we have our long summer days and our short winter times. We're using less energy because the sun, ultimately the source of all our power, is we're having maximum engagement with it. So in summer, you have all the time out in the daylight, and when winter comes along, you go to bed at dark and wake up at dawn. You're sleeping during most of the cold parts of it. So therefore, you're not keeping energy to keep you going. Now, and then again, population reduction. I can't stress that one enough. You see, because everything has been hooked and coupled and connected to, in cohesion with this concept of endless economic growth. And we're heading, what's happening to us right now is we're the same thing that happened to Atlantis. But it's happening on a softer way. Although maybe it happened like that back then. But our society is collapsing. There's no doubt about it. Things like the lockdown and the Rona, these are bandages. These are you know, you hear all the articles in the paper and they're saying things like, oh, the skies are so clear. Oh, you know, if we have 4 more years of this, we'll have met their climate targets by the Paris Accord and this kind of thing. These are all shocks to deal with the bad mistakes of the past, because the unlimited economic growth is like, well, we can make more money by selling a gigantic 4x4 than we can selling the same number of 20 small fuel efficient family cars, because the labor costs involved are much more when you have to create more of the small thing. So you create one big thing and you can sell it for a lot more. It's all greed again, this whole thing, and that's why you had these Hummers and this bullshit on the road. And it's happening now. You know, and the way to see this is you know, to invoke these kinds of supernatural methodological things. And yeah, Greta Thunberg did nothing against me, but when I look at her face, I just see evil, and that evil is the green demon, working through her possession. And you'll see that with a lot of these types. And this, anyone who thinks that we can replace the world that the hydrocarbon god had given us with the green demon, they're just they don't understand things like load and capacity and usage and wattage. They don't understand these basic physical terms of physics. Yes, you can produce, you know, you see like the new agers to say, oh look, I'm spinning a little wheel here with dynamo connected, I'm creating free energy. Okay, you created energy, that's true. Now power a factory on that, power a city, power your fucking house on that. You see, they don't understand the wattage and ampage and output. The load. They don't understand the load and the whole concept. And it's just this is when the green demon lies to them. The green demon pretends to be nature, but it's not really nature. It's a corruption. It's a corruption of the natural world, posing as a kind of a nature spirit when it's a demon. It's a demon that's out to deceive us. It's a demon, a green demon. And we are facing, you know, like, again, the parallel society, right? Right now, I would say to people, stop using Amazon and use the money, or if you're going to shop online, which we've no choice, buy things that will make you less efficient, less dependent on the system going forward. You know, a packet of seeds and start, you know, a window box. Now, that kind of thing, or move into a rural area where I live, where there's farmers everywhere, and access to food is easier. This kind of thing. You know, don't be playing into that stuff anymore. One little effort you can make, like going to bed early in the winter and getting up very early in the summer, can make an enormous difference, because then the gods of the hydrocarbon god will then respect us, because we're you know, insulating your house and things like that, and buying a smaller place, and you know, buying you know, not these kind of like show houses, these McDonald's mansions and stuff. Get yourself, you know, a very modest place, and if it's falling apart, let it fall apart once. It keeps the rain and winter weather off you. Don't be spending a fortune getting landscapers in if you don't have the money to do it. This kind of thing. And there's so much, you know, there's so much. Yeah, we are, like, I keep, you know, the parallel society is really my way of getting us as the tribe through this transition with as much pain, as much pain avoidance as possible. Because I tell you, there's huge amounts of suicides going on right now. And these are people who are being sacrificed to the green demon and to COVID, maybe its current name, but that's what it's really about. And they don't see any hope, and the lockdowns are destroying them and everything. And I'm hearing about more and more suicides, all different age groups. People have lost hope, and no one in this tribe gets lost on my watch. None of you are going to get lost. None of you are going to. I'm not going to lose any of you on my watch, as long as I can help, and that's why I make these videos, because I knew as soon as the Rona lockdown happened, I didn't know the reason why they were doing it. I remember I speculated it, but I think one of the first videos I made was speculating that this is just the final game, the end game in the final thing that happened with the OPEC oil crisis in '74. Yes, that's an element. Of course, there's an element of that. If it's an asteroid, I don't know. If it's really a virus, that's really a pandemic. I don't think so. It's a cover story for something else. And what it is they know that we're fucked, basically. And these, and they're not telling people the real reason. So this is where all suicides and depression and everything are coming from. You have to hold on and get through to the other side. Then it'll be grand. But right now, I think, the population reduction thing is happening by osmosis. People are just either suicide. One of the reasons so many people are dying in old folks' homes is because they don't see a reason to live. They're switching themselves off. And we've all lost friends and people recently that have been around for years, and now they're gone. And the suicides everywhere. And we've been done. We've been done. I often think of like my friend Ian Crane. He was almost like, coming out of the oil industry. I now see him almost as I do see him as a mythological figure. He came out of the corruption in the oil industry, and then went to war against things like fracking, and without joining the Green Demon, he did it. I now see him as a kind of a prophet. He was kind of like Ian was a kind of a prophet of these times and where we are now. With the gods of hydrocarbon, he'd be a metaphor in his whole life. He did very well working in the oil industry, serving the gods of hydrocarbon. But when he saw the abuses in the Gulf War and then fracking, he realized that the hydrocarbon god was being abused by the greed of man. The greed of man, under the guise of fake environmentalism. So we're probably going to be. I think they're going to start doing things like saying there's going to be lights out. They're going to start doing things saying like, and the green. What's most? Here's one that's quite evil. Here in Ireland, they're literally trying to do everything to stop people from burning solid fuel in their homes: coal, oil, turf, wood. They're trying to stop them. At the same time, they're trying to say that stuff all pollutes. Now, and Ireland has to help the world fucking fight for Greta Thunberg. Now, what are you going to replace it with? Oh, electric heating. In old houses that aren't insulated properly, what are you going to replace it with? Electric heating. From electricity that cannot generate a load from, you've closed down the turf burning stations and replaced them with what? Oil? Not oil, they have built one oil station. Wind turbines? They're not going to do it. They're going to be forcing us at one point to say lights out as soon as it gets dark and lights come on as soon as they're going to change things, because it won't be a case that they're doing it because they're evil, because they'll have realized the folly of serving the Green Demon. There'll be a king. You look at Trump, and Trump was very aware of all this. His speech at the Conservative Compact thing the other day, what it was called, he said that like, yeah, I love solar. Solar is fantastic. But there isn't enough. It doesn't have the capacity. I wish it did, and if it did, we'd build solar. But I'd love to see solar. But even in hot countries like in Arizona, in the United States, solar still wouldn't be enough to power cities like Phoenix, and so on. But there's other things too, like, cities like Phoenix have the best weather in the world for drying clothes on the line. Everybody should be hanging their clothes on the line in Phoenix, but there are city ordinances all over Arizona forbidding and making it illegal to dry your clothes on the line, because somehow that's considered what poverty and peasants do. It's a sign of poverty. That's insane. The hydrocarbon god wants you to put your clothes on the line, so the hydrocarbons of the sun and the hydrocarbons causing the thermal movements of wind along the planet can dry your fucking clothes. But the Green Demon wants you to pass laws to stop you doing that. So you're using your big gas or your electric dryers in your basement until eventually there's no power to do that. So you're drying it in your basement and stuff like that, and your big huge tumble dryer. Where does the electricity for that come from? You're paying for it. Now they got caught with their knickers down big time in Texas recently. Now there's two factors here with Texas. I know this is a long video and it's boring, but this is an important topic. In Texas, they came within 11 minutes of a total and utter collapse of the power grid. 11 minutes. The wind turbines had frozen. Now, Texas is awash still in oil and gas. Gas could still be used cleanly and safely to generate electricity there, but they've gone green to a huge part. This is all So the turbines they almost lost the grid. Now they signed up with utility providers in Texas. This is a crazy thing, where you pay for your electricity based on the value of that electricity. It's a really strange system, but it's almost like here you just pay on a unit per hour, and most places, and even in the United States, you pay per unit per hour. Remember per whatever the unit it is an hour or a day or whatever. Well, in Texas, the utility company had this thing like that is will charge your electricity rates based on the availability of electricity of the power of how much load is available. Now, these people signed up to this at a time when there was still lots of oil and gas generating power stations in Texas. Coupled with that, because of the collapse in oil prices that happens and happened until Biden came in, that it artificially gave cheap electricity. But what happened when they have the problem with the frozen turbines? The cost index per household on electricity shot up because suddenly they're not paying for by unit, they're by fixed unit, they're paying by the actual value of the electricity. And therefore you had stories of people in Texas paying $14,000 for 2 weeks worth of electricity because it becomes so rare. Now that's almost like the wrath of the hydrocarbon god. Why did you betray me? Why did you betray me? Why didn't you take your money and highly insulate your house? So there's no reason why someone should be freezing to death in Texas in winter. Their winters are mild by European and Northern Canadian standards. They should have been building houses that were so well insulated in Texas that as soon as the hot weather goes, you don't spend a penny on any kind of heating until the summer kicks in, and then maybe you'd have air conditioning. But there's other ways around that too as well. But no, this false economy, and these things are going to what you saw in Texas with the power system failure because of the freezing turbines, coupled with the index linked value of electricity per not by consumption used, but by availability of the national of the state grid. Or the utility provider's grid. You're going to see a lot more of what Texas was a warning shot of what's coming in future. So yeah, it's depressing. It's not good, but we're in it. But there's ways around it. Again, it's like if you have a house that's 20 rooms in it, live in three, and lock all the other ones up, and don't be heating them up. Throw the radiators off in them, and use them as storerooms and fill them up. Insulate your place. If you're buying an apartment building, get one that's in the middle of the building, not on the top or on the bottom. If you're buying a house and it's in a terrace, buy the house in the middle of the terrace, not on the end of the terrace, because it's easier to keep them warm. Because the houses on either side act as insulators on your exterior walls. Loads of things. Get a smaller car if you have to get a car. Don't be getting bigger things. Just reduce your overall energy use, and we will start to appease the hydrocarbon god again. Because suddenly, when we do use hydrocarbons, they won't be as abusive. We won't be abusing them as much. They'll have a more respectful relationship with them. And I mean, I used to look. I remember when I saw, the year 2000, walking around the suburbs, the leafy suburbs of Dublin with tiny narrow streets from fucking God knows when, how they were built, Middle Ages, whatever. and in small urban areas. And, some bitch driving her gigantic 4x4 Toyota or Dodge truck to pick up, scones from the artisan bakery. It's what? When she could have, there's loads of other ways she could have got there. Like, or better still, bake the scones at home. So there's the thing for you. And they're the ones who profaned and violated the hydrocarbon god. And I can guarantee you that worshipping the green demon through its servitors and its priests like Greta Thunberg and all these other professional green types, it's only going to make it worse. Oh, like I'm looking at the Green Party here in Ireland, and it's there. If there was ever a black dark cult who are destroying this cult, the country from within, both attacking like their minister for children being a big lover of pedophiles and stuff like that, and of a famous pedophile in England, and they're all this drag queens reading stories to kids in school, and at the same time like making sure uh, that you can't burn turf and fire anymore. You can't do any. It's enough. This is you see when people cut their own fuel in the past, like you, there used to be a thing in rural Ireland called the day on the bog. As soon as you got sunshine, everyone went out to the bog, and they used to cut their fuel for the winter, and they became very powerful cultural events. People would sit around, drink tea, tell stories until it got dark, and put the turf out to dry. A very beautiful spiritual thing. The Greens came along and turned that into a black mass. That's what they've done. By turning something that was very close to our people and transformed it into something they wanted to destroy. And if that's not proof that the green agenda is demonic, on that one small thing, I don't know what is. But I can tell you one thing: there's the hydrocarbons are not limited. There are ways to tamper them and to, like I said, we could go back to coal. We could even go to wood burning stations in some countries. Things like biomass. There's ways of doing it where it does produce decent amounts of wattage. And people say, oh, it's got a smokestack on it. But there's practically water coming out of it. We've got to reduce our populations, and we've got to reduce the amount of energy we as individuals use. And we've got to, if you're concerned about energy consumption and the environment, I can tell you, you should be hating the wind turbines. Instead, you should be learning how to love things like insulation. And what is the insulation that insulates your house made from? Oil. Take care.